We are back live. The 2020 Victoria Tea Festival revival. What an inspiring discussion we just had with Kevin Gascoigne of Camellia sinensis over in Montreal. We've had farmers live from Kyoto, live from Yunnan, China. We had some farmers in India showing us around while manufacturing was happening live. We've had some amazing sessions with folks from Vancouver. We're here in Victoria right now. We've had such an amazing 19 hours so far. So there's 24 hours. We're on the home stretch. Ryan Moen is here with me, of course, co-director of the Tea Festival and co-host of the Online Tea Victoria Tea Festival. We're joined from London, England right now, where we have Tim from Postcard Teas joining us. Really excited to have you on, Tim, and wonderful to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too, and lovely to say good morning to everybody on the west coast of Canada.
It's 7 a.m. Yeah, we're at 7 a.m. We've come across the other side. It was late night, and now we're at breakfast time.
Yeah, it's first light, and you're here to brighten up our day, I hear.
That's
It's the end of the day for me though. So I'm drinking not a normal type of tea. I'm drinking a tea alcohol, which I'll talk about a little bit later because I need to take the edge off speaking, and also it's the end of the day, so I can have a.
You're allowed. You're allowed. Are we allowed in the morning? I don't know.
I should have sent you some.
It would have been great. We next time. But we could drink some teas while we're talking to you. Maybe we can drink one of we can drink one of Kevin's selections. This Rogue would be pretty exciting from Wu Yi. I assume that'd be cool.
Perfect.
Wouldn't that be good? That'd be good. Okay, we're gonna do that. That's what we're gonna do. So maybe you can tell our viewers a little bit about who is Tim. What is the Postcard Teas project? So they get a sense of what you're all about.
Of course, yeah. Happy to fill anybody who doesn't know about us. It's I have a tea business in London called Postcard Teas. I've been visiting tea growing areas for about 28 years since I lived in Japan. I was studying with mainly East Asian people, so people from Taiwan, Korea, China, Japanese in Kyoto. So I started to become interested in Japanese tea culture, then Taiwanese, Korean, Chinese tea culture, and that's how I became involved in it. And 20 years ago, I started importing tea, and I've been doing that obviously for 20 years. The shop is now 15 years old. We started off at a little farmer's market, and then as it grew, and as I went to more countries, and I got involved I had a Chinese colleague, Lou, joined us. I got married to a Japanese woman called Asako, who's really helped. And so that made us do things that maybe some of the other companies in London and the UK weren't doing.
Very cool.
We kind of specialize on very small farms. That's another point of difference. So the average size is just 5 acres. The largest is 15 acres. And that's across the 7 countries we work in. We work in India, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea, China and Japan.
Wow.
And also we focus very early on provenance. So I thought that was going to become important. And as I was selling quite expensive teas, even if they weren't expensive, I thought it was very important people knew where they're from, had a connection. I had visited all the farms, so it was important to do that. So in 2008, we put the maker's name or maker's names, if it was a blend, on everything. So we now have about 80 teas, and we always have the maker's names on them, and you have the provenance on there. So anyway, I mean, what I thought I'd do today, apart from drinking alcohol and getting drunk before your eyes, was to just talk about, I've been in the tea business for 20 years. uh, think about how it might change in the next 20 years, and ask people for questions at the end. If anybody really wants to speak in between, I'm very happy for them to do that too.
I just wanted a quick interjection. Is just that
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know if like you wouldn't know this, but I have had a chance to have your teas not at your space. I believe you supply Prufrock in London.
Yeah.
And when my wife and I visited London, England, I was really excited to check out Postcard Teas. But how it happened is that didn't end up being possible. But we did get a chance to try them there, and it was. I know it's not the same, but it's
Often.
I said, okay. Well, they were really careful. It was really, and they really believed in what you did, and that really came through. They were really happy, and actually, that was where I learned about you. Was at Prufrock. And then since then, I've heard about Postcard Teas from a variety of different people. Jen, who owns the Tea Mistress here in Salt Spring, she speaks the world of you, and really felt your involvement would be opportune. I was really excited that she knew you because we work with the my company supplies a lot of specialty coffee shops. So James Hoffman and that whole conversation. It ends up coming up a lot, and the fact that you're working with a coffee company that is also working with him, it just ends up. I don't know. It just there seems to be this interaction.
Well, actually,
that's really fun.
where I started, my second tea company was at Borough Market in 2000,
Okay.
and that's where Gwilym, who is one part of Prufrock, was managing Monmouth Coffee then. So we go back a long way.
Cool.
And specialty coffee, I've seen it change and develop, and it's done lots of really great things
Hasn't it?
for tea.
It's a really interesting parallels, right? Like there's just so many ways for, like, I look at tea as a resurging not market. I don't know how to explain this. Like it's a resurging industry, whereas
Absolutely.
specialty coffee seems to be like very like maverick new, and so there's just so much to learn from this like ancient. And not that coffee isn't ancient, but just the way that it's being discussed is a really new way of talking about it. And tea did used to be discussed this way, so it's really interesting to see that resurgence happen at the same time, and that give and take, and that the sharing. But sorry, I didn't want to take away too much from your talk. So you want to talk to us?
Not at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love Prufrock, and specialty coffee has been a real big changer. And the provenance side to what we did was prompted by, I guess, specialty coffee. You weren't buying any specialty coffee in the early days of specialty coffee, the third wave here, 2005, 2010, without provenance. And yet it was very common within the specialty tea industry at that time not to have provenance. But yeah, let me whiz through what I wanted to speak about. I hope people find it interesting. It's kind of about two topics. One is kind of the big changes in tea to do with bag tea, leaf tea, and bottled tea. Is kind of how people will consume tea in the next 20 years, or may consume tea in the next 20 years. And then I wanted to briefly touch on, I don't know whether other people have, an issue which I even sometimes ignore because it's so painful for all kinds of tea, but even especially specialty tea, which is worker pay and worker conditions in certain countries. And it should be kind of the most important thing. And
ethics.
I'll talk about how I think it isn't always talked about in the correct way, or possible things. There aren't any easy answers. So shall I just go ahead? I've written some of these things down because I get nervous talking sometimes.
Sure, man. Yeah, I'm excited to hear from you. Your thoughts on this ethical component in the tea industry and how it's often overlooked.
Good. I hope you enjoy it. I'll keep an eye on the time too. I was born. I hope you can believe it. Looking at me online now, I was born just before 1970, and in the UK, 2% of the tea market then was tea bags. Now it's flipped completely the other side. It's just 2% or less of leaf tea. And I think this is to do with convenience, but I'm interested outside great little companies like ours, trying to promote leaf tea and try and break down the difficulty some people have about making loose leaf tea. I find the convenience of tea bags is really triumphing, and this is a big sadness for me. I wrote a book called Easy Leaf Tea a couple of years ago, which was trying to get people to not be afraid of making loose leaf tea. I said it's the simplest form of cooking because you've just got 2 ingredients, water and tea,
right.
And a little bit of time. There's nothing else. And it's a wonderful thing to do because it's one of the few things where you tend to get better and better and better. Everybody with a little bit of practice can get better. So I'm a huge believer in leaf tea. However, we are up against it. And I think the tea bag is very clever because they give a portion size, and people sometimes get kind of frightened by too large teaspoons or something on a measure. Because tea is difficult, you either need a small scales, it's harder to do by volume. You can do it by volume, but people like the simplicity of a tea bag in terms of a dose.
Right.
1 bag makes 1 cup. It's super simple. And then people increasingly like no mess of any kind at all. Making loose leaf tea, I'm happy with a little bit of mess. I'm happy with leaves in my cup. But even, people, I've been interested in the very, very hyper thin filters that some people use, even in Gongfu tea. Why? Unless your tea was grown with an absurd amount of pesticides or whatever, you can eat it. It's a vegetable. So people are still afraid of the leaves. I don't think they're going to get over that. And this is why, sadly, I think tea bags are here to stay. And I think they will, keep a strong market force. In Japan, when I used to go there, almost 30 years ago, most hotels or kind of guest houses had loose leaf tea. And then they started to carry more and more tea bags. And now they sometimes just have that kind of tea powder, which you mix in with hot water. So we're getting to the ultimate convenience.
Right.
And that was this kind of second thing I wanted to talk about, which is about bottled tea and convenience. Bottled tea is really going to explode, I think. I mean, it's exploded in Japan, where it's the biggest soft drink category by far. It outsells any other things, colas and lemonades, everything. And 1, because it's healthy. 2, because it's quite delicious. It has less sugar, which people don't want. But it's also not great. It has lots of additives in it. It has plastic in it. You have to transport it, long distances. You need refrigeration. And they're even starting to promote it. I did an Instagram post on it the other day, trying to promote this little talk with a famous kabuki actor called Ebizo, and he was advertising a bottled tea which you bought and then put in a microwave to warm, and that for me was kind of really heart-wrenching to see that kind of reaction to bottled drinks and promotion of buying something ready-made when it's so simple to make. But that's what I see happening, and I think obviously kombucha is a great thing. You're starting to also get some very premium cold brew teas with provenance on them, mainly from Japan, but also other East Asian countries. We've worked with, you mentioned Prufrock we work with, but we also work with 3 Michelin star restaurants like the Fat Duck, and we work with the highest restaurant in the world, 50 Best in London, called Clove Club, which the chef, Isaac McHale, is a real tea head. He loves tea.
Nice. And
we've been able to, with the head of drinks there, Rob Simpson, do ambient tea production, which is like cold brew, but using more room temperature brewing,
Oh,
and you get
interesting.
more body and slightly different texture, better aroma, in my opinion. And also, when you serve it at room temperature, it's really great. But I personally believe that both for things like that and for ready to drink teas, you might as well just make them yourself. So much cheaper, so much healthier. But I do see the rise of that really taking off worldwide, and I think we have to prepare for it a little bit.
Even less of a mess
Uh,
for people than tea bags really is these ready to drink beverages. And it's but the plastic, that might be an issue. I don't want to interrupt you here too much, but like,
yeah, yeah, no, the
like
plastic is a big issue. I think the plastic
the
is.
waste element, I think, is perhaps what could play a role in not defeating but slowing down, or maybe even putting tea bags in their place a little bit and saying, hey, like, we don't have to have this waste, we don't have to have this this challenge in terms of extraction. It can be a conversation about environment, and I think that's a good conversation to have, right?
Absolutely. I think that most people don't realize that in majority of paper bags there's a plastic lining, so they can easily be heat sealed. And then lots of the even uh, the cornstarch, but the nylon ones obviously are definitely a kind of plastic. Even some of the cornstarches are kind of, they're natural plastics. So I don't know about the energy use in them, but in an ideal world, you don't use them. Obviously, we don't all live in ideal worlds, so we can't be purists. But I think the nature, you were talking about coffee shops, and it's been fascinating to see how specialty coffee, lots of small businesses kind of took on much larger businesses and at least changed them. I mean, think of Third Waves, Bucks, and other big coffee chains. It was massive.
Right.
And hopefully smaller tea businesses can play a part in influencing larger tea businesses to do things better, to offer more loose leaf tea, which of course gives you a bigger choice as well, because if you're only choosing tea bags, it's a very small selection because it has to be bagged, whereas you can buy a multitude of different types of tea when you're going loose leaf.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But talking about bottled teas, this is not really promotion because there's none of it out. But I'm drinking. Been working with a distiller for 2 years. This is done in 2018, but this is an early batch, not as good as the ones we're working with now. And we've been working on tea distillates. There are a lot of tea gins out there at the moment and things like that. I think, though, you can start going to get some really sophisticated ones. And I think more than the cold brew, ready to drink ones, I think these will perform a different function of kind of plug and play, or the same kind of ease that a wine bottle has, where you just uncork it and then you can share culture. I hope that some of the best tea distillates in the future, because they also give a very different kind of flavor of tea. They take different aspects because you extract such different sensations through alcohol than you do with water.
It's such a good solvent. Alcohol is like the best solvent you can work with, right? For extracting.
One of the best.
Well, one of the best. Sorry. Yes. Thank you for the correction.
Well,
it's a really fascinating canvas to work with, right? For extracting, you use alcohol to combine. Like if you have water and oil, if you want them to work together, throw in alcohol, and there's going to be possibilities there that weren't possible before that. So alcohol can also be a bridge for helping different liquids to interact with each other. So that's another element there too, right?
it could be fun anyway. I predict, not only because I've been working on it for so many years, but I predict there's going to be many good ones coming out soon. In fact, I was consulting with a very famous vodka company this year during lockdown that is releasing soon a pretty good tea vodka, much better than I thought. When I was approached about it, I was a bit reluctant to get involved, and then when I started tasting it, I was pleasantly surprised. So I think you're going to see a lot of good things, a lot of not so good things, but you're going to see a lot more things anyway. So look out for that. Bottled tea is going to be, I think, the big thing of the next 20 years, whether we like it or not. And some of it will be good, but some of it will be horrendous for the environment, horrendous for tea. I mean, in Japan, bottled tea has really driven down the price of tea too. I don't know if anybody's spoken about that, but even in Japan, which is a very developed country and doing okay economically, tea farmers are having a tough time because their main real market is making 1,500 yen a kilo. So what is that? $15 a kilo. Very inexpensive, cheap green tea for the Itoens and the other ready-to-drink companies that want to use domestic green tea rather than Chinese-style sencha teas, but don't really want to pay much of a premium.
And so they go for those larger, and you see like a concentration of tea farms in areas that are easy to harvest using tractors and heavy equipment, and you see really a breakdown in these traditional regions. You see a huge abandonment happening where lots of trees that no longer have anybody looking after them. Kids don't want to take over from the family farm because there's just no money in it. And those that are staying on are getting older and older, and they're doing it just because they've always done it. But it's harder and harder to make a living doing it with this constant pressure downward, to supply these.
Absolutely. I'm drinking a tea, or the tea distillate I'm drinking at the moment comes from a wonderful village called Mandokoro, and it's in Shiga.
Yeah, I was just there last year hand picking.
Oh, magical! Lucky you. It's I've only been there twice, but such a magical place. And Mr. Shirogi-san, that we sometimes import some tea from. He, I think at that time, was the youngest tea farm owner. That may have changed, but the last time we went back there were about 4 or 5 years ago. He was the youngest tea owning farmer, and he was in his 70s. So, and now he would be approaching 80. And we were speaking with Sato-san, who sadly died. She was in her mid 80s, and so many of that generation.
And it's mostly most of those farms that were producing tea were transformed into timber production, right? Like a lot of them aren't even growing tea anymore. Their land they converted into producing trees for lumber, and yeah, it's a really a sad situation. Those that are producing very small percentage of what it used to be, right? It used to be quite a region, but it's really hard to grow tea there. Like you cannot bring in
machinery.
You can't bring in machinery. It's too steep. You need to use the Zairaishu, the heirloom cultivars that grow there. Like, and they're amazing, but they're a very different flavor profile than most. I think people enjoying their teas in Japan are.
That's right. I mean, one of our least expensive Japanese teas is. I love it. It's a Zairaishu, and it's sold very inexpensively to us by the farmer because he can't really blend with it. It's too distinctive. So we then sell it on cheaply because it's so distinct. And this is a strange way. In one sense, I wanted to price it up because it's so great. But I wanted to make it inexpensive. It's inexpensive because it's special or different rather than. Anyway, it's a weird one. But actually, talking about the economy of tea, I'd really like to get on briefly to the end part.
Yes.
Open it up for anybody else to ask questions. But talking about how difficult it is for people, I mean, I think one of the things which is difficult for the tea industry to talk about is pay and conditions.
Right.
And the specialty tea industry is pretty good at also saying this isn't really an issue with us. It's an issue with mainstream supermarket, inexpensive bag tea. But for me, I think it's is actually particularly relevant to specialty tea, because specialty tea works in many countries where pay and working conditions are an issue. And for example, I wanted to see one of the most expensive teas I could find that was made by people paid very low pay. And I found one last night that's selling around the world at the equivalent of $2,000 a kilo for a tea which is made by people paid less than £2.50 a day, so $2.50 a day. So it's bad enough that supermarket tea is made at that, people pay that amount per day, but the fact that a tea which is sold as being one of the most luxurious in the world and one of the most special in the world is made by people that I know are paid that amount per day, because it's the statutory wage in that area, is kind of deeply shocking. So I'm going to want to explore what the other issues that specialty tea has. I think one of the problems it has is that it tries to persuade us that if you pay more for the tea, you are somehow helping out. But that's not always the case, because direct trade does help, it can help, but direct trade with a very large estate or plantation with many hired laborers who are paid a low daily wage doesn't really help. One of the reasons why we switched to small farms was that I got sick and tired of asking about this issue in the noughties with in the early years of Postcard Teas, when I would talk to people and they would say, you know, you can give some money for computers, you can give some money for the new buildings, you can give some money for this, for that, but you know, one, you don't have enough money to affect wages, and two, they're set by the local government, the state government, they're set with the unions and with us, and we can't alter them. I found by working with small farms where there was either no hired labor, or if there was very small, very few, occasionally hired laborers, in one case in the Sound, we doubled the local pay level because there was, they wanted to do it, we could do it by committing to buy a certain amount, and it made a very, very small difference. I don't know what the answer is on a much larger scale, but this is something which deeply concerns me. And I think the other big issue for specialty tea, but also mass market tea, is certification, broadly speaking, isn't working.
We had a whole talk on that.
On this. It works for organic, it works for environmental conditions, but so many numerous studies, Oxfam last year, Sheffield University, Columbia Business School, about 6 years ago, they've all done in-depth academic research which has showed that certification, some of the certifications, makes very little difference to the conditions. Most of the workers aren't even aware that their estate is certified. People prepare for certification visits. I mean, I've been to lots of certified estates and plantations myself, and while some of them are very happy places, the conditions as well as the pay were extremely low. When I was writing another book I wrote to the biggest UK organic certifiers, and I asked them whether they were happy that people were paid less than $2 a day, and they said they couldn't comment on whether they're happy or not, but that was the local minimum wage, therefore it was perfectly okay. Wow. So we had I really don't think those people should be certifying with organic or ethical certification, because that's what people judge in the supermarket and sometimes in specialty tea, and it's not the best guide. I wonder if we shouldn't have something where people are obliged to put the wage levels on packages of tea as well as the provenance. I mean, it's gonna it would be highly controversial, and it would be very hard to enforce or get people to do. But in a voluntary way, it's an interesting idea, and it would make people think. I don't think it's going to happen very quickly, but it's something which I think has to be addressed, because it's the awareness issue, and then people could have a better discussion than what's the choice, non-certified, certified, go with certified. It must be better.
You know, that's an interesting question. I mean, we talk about borrowing from specialty coffee. There seems to be a movement in third wave coffee that's listing on the packaging itself what was paid for the product, and making that super transparent. And I know you were just saying how the price per kilogram doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to translate to better wages on the ground. But it is an important,
that's the real issue.
It is, and you know, Wild Tea Chi delivered an impassioned presentation. We had Shana Chang on here. She founded the International Tea School, I think it's called. I'm sorry, Tea Academy. And she was talking. She said she felt like, looking back at her time, where she was that person who would be helping farms to prepare for those visits, or to be translating in a way, because the people being sent didn't really have the ability to communicate directly with workers on the ground. And so she felt like that was wrong, and she really wanted to participate in a more meaningful space for this discussion, and she wanted to bring forward a way of interacting with tea, and that was very real, you know, like that was saying, hey, you know, like, this is wrong to create these certification systems and then cheat, and that's definitely something that happens. And you know, it's not just tea, you know, like, it doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do about it, but it definitely seems to be that often is the end game with capitalism in general, is this downward pressure on wages, this, like, you know, like, you get to a point where there's, like, say, prison labor and people getting paid like $1 a day, even in countries that we're talking China here, we're not talking India here, we're talking countries you would least expect it, and it's a problem in a lot of industries. Maybe it's transparency. I know that when we started, it was all about, you know, learning, and it still is. It's just this forever quest. But one of the nice things about working with smaller producers is definitely being able to really see there's something really real. Hey, like, if you work with a small farm where there's maybe one hire, 2 hires, something like that, and it's a small space, you're able to get information very quickly. You're also able to see that when you do commit annually to particular harvests, that has really real effects, right? It's so much more real than these massive corporations. I'm a lot smaller than you are, my company, but that's it's an interesting effect that even a very small company like mine can have.
But I think that's the nice thing about what happened in specialty coffee, and what could and should be happening more in specialty tea, which is linking up. And I saw it very much in specialty coffee as it started. Gwilym of Prufrock famously did a disloyalty card, where he was encouraging people to go and drink coffee at other coffee bars. And I mean, I'm not. I mean, we do recommend other tea shops and other tea companies, especially if they have more expertise in a particular area that people want to know about. But I think the industry as a whole, if we joined together slightly more and started to work together to tackle some of these things, and as you said, I think it does help if more small companies work with other small companies, and you're going to see a lot more of that happening, I think, in the future.
I do think so. There's an opportunity for these networks to occur in a way that they didn't before. You know, like, even if we kind of analyze Japan for a moment, right? Which is where I started as well, and it sounds like you have a lot of experience in Japan. Is that there's this slow. There's these regions in Japan that are really famous, like your Ujicha, your Yamecha, your the tea production in Shizuoka, etc. I think that they became that way because of the proximity to different time periods when those were capitals of the country.
Yeah.
And I think it was just they were near the market. It was fairly good growing conditions. Sort of a conversation started about how amazing those particular growing conditions were. But the reality is Japan has a lot of very hospitable to tea growing condition areas. But having the factories nearby becomes definitely a big issue, and being able to bring them there. But once you have a factory nearby, that seems to really make a huge difference. And then you can have smaller families producing their teas and getting them produced for themselves. And then I think with these global networks that we're starting to see, I'm hoping for a revival, like the work that we're seeing some people doing on the ground in different villages in Japan is really fascinating, right? It's really interesting, and I love to make visits when it's not a pandemic. My wife and I go about twice a year, and we visit small farms, and we really enjoy that relationship. And I do see a future there. I hope that in the next 20 years that is a direction that things can go. That there's the resolution, instead of being this, I think that might be the problem, is when the resolution of the relationship is just too large, we can't really understand what it is that we're interacting with. But when we can find that down a bit, we can really get in deep. I think that it opens up so much opportunity to be more ethical, to get better tasting product, to learn so much more and share that knowledge. It's a fascinating opportunity.
Absolutely. I think Japan actually is a very good role for other countries too. Of course, it's not perfect, but the flatness of society is very interesting. Mm-hmm. People forget that quite a lot of it was done post-war with American redistribution of land. Mm-hmm. So that's partly why you've got small farms, and it kind of works some of the time. I know we're talking about abandoned farms here too, but communal factories very much work, where lots of small farmers are sharing the same factory, even some private factories where lots of farmers process their tea together. I see that happening a lot more in somewhere like India in the future too. We work with one small farmers project in the south of India, in Sahadri, that Jonathan, my colleague, visited in Kerala, and it was an EU built factory. But through that, lots of the small farmers could really do much better than they could do by selling to a normal bought leaf factory. So I think small communal factories where small farmers can sell their teas is a model which could go out into the world. Obviously, more technology. I saw when looking at a worker pay in India, for example, it's the largest private employer. 3.5 million people are employed on tea as tea workers in India, which is massive. Huge. And obviously, if you start to modernize and put in a lot of technology, you're going to lose some jobs. But I think people over romanticize about how wonderful and how much pleasure lots of tea workers get from it. Some people do, but lots of them would like machinery to make their lives happier and better.
A little bit easier. Different design of the tea fields in general would then happen. It would be a very much a big change to be able to allow for this machinery to find its place. But it would be really interesting. That is one option for at least increasing production, while perhaps increasing wages, because you have greater outputs, you're able to pay more and make the profits. But I just feel like that's still like a race, right? Like to the bottom is
yeah, absolutely.
It's I think that not only is it important that we have this micro relationship, but I think that also some really inspiring stuff you see is like in Taiwan, where the government has participated in creating these tea festivals for educating the local population on the idiosyncrasies and the interesting elements of the different teas, and bringing this wine approach that's practiced in, say, France and Italy, etc., and bringing it to the local populace. I think that would be so fascinating to see more of, and it was really cool to have Teatopia, the Wadzuka Tea Festival, on the show. I think more of that is so important for encouraging that space, that opportunity share knowledge domestically. And I love what wine does. I think it's such an interesting way of dealing with a botanical, right? Is to have this conversation. I know when we started, that was really fascinating to me, is just to see soil structure and the name of the person and the elevation and the year it was harvested, and all this data can be, maybe it's not important, but I think it is. I think it breeds accountability. It also makes it cool. It makes it fun, like really interesting. I think there's a really cool opportunity there on a lot of levels to not only do this for this kind of global network that is slowly building and allowing these farmers to export, but I think it's important that be employed at the local level too. You know what I mean?
I think you're right. I think the countries that do best have both strong domestic markets and then an international market as well. Mm-hmm. The tea producing countries, they're not just dependent on an international market. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, we're at 7:43. We only have you for 45 minutes today, Tim. And Ryan, I feel like we haven't had a chance to bring you into this conversation so much. But was there any question that you wanted to have for Tim, or any comments that you wanted to make for Tim before we move on today?
No, this seems like a pretty concise. There was a lot of information coming, but it was all on point, and I think it was really important to hear the one end of the merchant aspect of the industry talking about the other, and we've heard when we listen to the farmers, and we listen to the actual nationals of China talking about how they want to change the next 20 years of the industry. I think it's just matching up the two. That I think that as long as there's people like the both of you looking for those spaces, and that we can continue to keep farmers coming on here, that's the momentum that's going to take over, because there's no other option. It's a beautiful thing, and I don't think that we're all naive to be having all these celebrations all around the world. And if there's anything tea has taught us, that it's going to outlast all of us and all these trends, and it's probably one of the most beautiful relationships that humans have ever discovered.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Ryan. That's really great. And also, I think you're right to talk about the farmers, because I think that's the other big thing, is that if you put the emphasis back on the producer, you don't negate the brand, but you kind of the brand is there with the farmer. It's a kind of more equality. Whereas with the massive brands that are selling a bottle product or a bag product, it's really just about the brand. It's not about the farmer. So I think sharing the branding, or sharing the ownership of the tea with the producer. I was never comfortable of saying, this is my tea. No, it's not. It's made by Mr. Shirogi in Mandokoro. It's made by Mr. Aoki in Oita, in Kitsuki. It's made by whoever it is. It's made by Master Shu in Wuyishan. You can't not have that kind of information, I think.
It's critical, I think, moving forward, especially if we want to really give respect to these amazing craftspeople. It's true in wine, it's true in tea, it's true in specialty cheese, in specialty, like everything. Like, I think that the producer being part of the relationship is so important. Really appreciate you being on today, Tim.
Pleasure.
I feel like this at the end of every conversation on this series. What are we on? We are on the 19th conversation, and every time 45 minutes feels like it's gone in 2 seconds. So I hope to, again, once this is over, find myself once the pandemic's over, find myself in England again. It would be lovely to share.
I'm looking forward to tea and cake in Victoria. Last time I was there 22 years ago, a lot of cake. I had more cake than tea, but I'm looking forward to...
Come visit. Maybe you can make it to the next, the 2021 Victoria Tea Festival. Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be grand. Thank you so much.
I'll mill you a fresh matcha.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You take care, Tim.
Care.
Really appreciate you coming on the show. All right. You take care.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So that was Tim from Postcard Teas joining us. What a treat that was. Really appreciated this opportunity to learn from him and to have this conversation that's so critically important. Wow, yeah, I'll leave the rest to you there, Ryan.
Okay, well, yeah, exactly. That was pretty fast paced, especially for this time of the morning for us. But right up next is Kimmy from Wismaja. It's going to be actually a pretty reasonable time in the morning for them to be calling in from Vancouver, just our neighbors across the strait there in the Salish Sea. So it's 7:47 now. That means there's 13 minutes for you to rest, perhaps clean out your teapot and get it refreshing for our next guest. And until then, you have our waiting attention, and we'll be back at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So thank you.